We are talking The Curse of Humpty Dumpty. This one written, directed, produced by Scott Jeffrey. If Scott Jeffrey sounds familiar to you, he is the head of Jagged Edge Productions, a company which produces many low-budget British horror films. I have actually heard that Scott Jeffrey may actually be a pseudonym for another creative person who uses a false name, but I don't know if that's actually true. But that's not the video we're talking about today. We are here to discuss The Curse of Humpty Dumpty, that stars Nicola Wright, a regular in Jagged Edge Productions. And at first I thought this was going to be a typical kind of like knock it out cheap and quick creature feature, but this one actually has a little bit more depth than I was expecting, believe it or not, especially with such a kind of cheesy title. It focuses on a family where we have a mother in her kind of 50s, played by Nicola Wright, and she's suffering from early signs of dementia, and it's getting kind of progressively worse, and pretty quickly. And she has two kind of younger daughters that decide they're going to go and take her into this kind of family home out in the country to try and look after her a little bit better there, and hopefully kind of memories and stuff will help her kind of maybe kind of feel a little bit more at home and things like this. However, when they are there, they discover in a local shop this strange looking doll, this kind of Humpty Dumpty doll, so to speak, and Nicola Wright's character actually recognises it as something from her past. They decide it's going to be something that's going to be at home with them, and it may well be a entity or the kind of the host kind of body, if you like, of a demonic entity which has murderous intent. Or it could be something else. It could be something a little bit closer to home. Is that not just dementia that Nicola Wright's character is suffering from? Is she maybe having a little bit more mental issues than we initially thought? Or maybe it's something in between. You have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss what I think works in this movie. So as I've kind of alluded to, this movie actually has a little bit more plot than I was expecting. A lot of these kind of Jagged Edge productions are just kind of like monster on the loose, people running away from it, and that's kind of it. I always take kind of like umbrage really when people say it's written by, because there's virtually no, there's no real plot in it. This one actually does have a fair amount of twists and turns and kind of reveals as the kind of the movie goes on. So I was actually quite impressed with the script here. I don't think it's entirely successful, to be honest, but I actually did think this has a little bit more plot and a little bit more kind of going on a kind of a psychological kind of style horror film than I was initially expecting. I have to say, I think for the most part, the acting is pretty good. I think our three main characters, for the most part, do a pretty good job of making a kind of a believable family unit. In particular, the two kind of sisters and their kind of relationship, where they are different kind of personalities, but do seem to overall kind of get on and kind of share a love for themselves and their mother, and ultimately want the best for the mother. But they just kind of maybe have different kind of ways of expressing themselves. I thought that was quite good. Again, for a low-budget creature feature, a low-budget kind of horror movie, the effects are a little bit of a mixed bag, but for the most part, especially involving the doll, it kind of reminded me of one of the creatures from the 2015 Krampus movie, the way it kind of jaws kind of opens up. I mean, we never see it, animatedly opening up, but it's just kind of like, it's either closed or it's shut. They just kind of cut to it, because obviously they can't afford to do the actual opening sequence. It's clearly two puppets, but nonetheless, I appreciate some of the kind of the effects. I didn't think it was too bad, and the actual mystery leading up to it is intriguing. And as with most Jagged Edge productions, because they are so prolific, I do find they have a certain quality in regards to their productions, and in regards to kind of camera placement, sound design, things like this. That even though they are cheaply made, they make so many films. You can't help become have a certain level of experience that comes with that, and as such, even so, this movie is clearly low budget, and we're going to talk about it. Nonetheless, it's still at least somewhat proficiently made on a kind of a technical basis. Okay, so what doesn't work? A lot of it is kind of the inverse of what I've just kind of spoken about. Going back through in the same order. The plot, yes, I do think this has more plot than a lot of these kind of low-budget kind of horror movies. But I do think it gets a little bit convoluted, especially in the kind of the the kind of the third act, I would say, where more things are kind of revealed. I don't know if it was entirely successful in demonstrating what the movie was trying to say, and I think the message gets a little bit lost here with a little bit of sloppy execution. The acting, the acting I actually genuinely think was good, to be honest. And Nicola Wright, I think, does a good job here, but there are times where I think she somewhat overacts. She constantly has this kind of pensive look throughout the entirety of the movie. I don't know, her character is kind of struggling with memory loss, but there are occasions here where I just felt it was just a tad kind of like hammed up a little bit too much. There are scenes where I think she does a fine job, to be honest. But there are scenes where it was just kind of up a little notch. There's also the character of her sister-in-law, whose character arc seemed a little bit unrealistic to me. And there's a sequence, for example, where her motivation is she wants to try and ultimately get the property for herself, but she's like waiting out in the rain in the night, trying to kind of hear a conversation that she has no bearing, she has no knowledge that there's going to be anything juicy and things like this. I think, come on, that just seems completely kind of like not at all kind of like what any sane person would kind of do, and stuff like that. The effects, as I've kind of mentioned, are again a little bit of a mixed bag. I genuinely quite like the Humpty Dumpty puppet. To be clear, this is not really a Humpty Dumpty nursery rhyme horror movie. It's really just called Humpty Dumpty. I'm assuming because it's bald. I feel your pain, fella. I feel your pain. But yeah, it's kind of like it's just called Humpty Dumpty. It's nothing really to do with the nursery rhyme, to be quite honest. But as I said, there are some obvious kind of cheapness here. As I've already mentioned, we don't really see the kind of like this thing's jaws opening up. We see one shot with it's obviously one puppet, and a second shot where it's a second puppet, and things like this. But there's also the odd decision to have some really weird CGI elements to it, where we have other dolls that seemingly are moving around and stuff. And it's just like, surely it's easy to put like a little, mechanism where you can kind of turn a doll's head. You didn't need to make it CGI. It just seemed like a really bizarre thing to include, and stands out as being horribly kind of like intrusive kind of CGI, which just didn't need it to. There's a reason for it maybe not being realistic story-wise, but even so, it doesn't really make sense, and it could have been done a lot more effectively. Sometimes I think with Scott Jeffrey productions, they tend to be somewhat overlit, and at times kind of like takes away from the creepiness factor. I do feel this movie could have had a bit more of a creepy factor, but I don't think the cinematography never really tends to be amazing in these films. They're adequate, but they tend to be overlit. Obviously, so we as an audience can see what's going on, but that kind of the drawback of that is it ultimately doesn't seem as scary as it could have been. To be honest with you, and just the kind of the general cheapness of the production. For example, towards the beginning of the movie, we go into this kind of antique shop, and it's just a room with like someone's printed out on an A4 bit of paper antiques and stuck it on the door. It just kind of like has that real kind of cheap feel. They've obviously just shot it in kind of people's houses and things like this. So it does have a kind of a low budget kind of feel to it. Ultimately, though, I would say this is not a bad movie. It's actually a relatively kind of watchable film if you kind of like low budget fare. I don't think it's as effective as it could have been. I felt have had a little bit more time in care. This movie could have actually genuinely been a better than average film. But as it stands, it's certainly not bad. It's certainly watchable and has a reasonable kind of like plot, character development and things like that in it. But ultimately, it's kind of let down by, again, just maybe the lack of attention to detail here and there. But I'll give it an average mark, to be honest with you. This is kind of like an average straight-to-video movie. It's certainly, you can do a lot worse on this one. I do think that, judging by, trust me, the plenty of movies that I've reviewed here, this one actually does have some watchability factor in it. It's just not one I think you'd kind of ever kind of go back to necessarily. So it's a 5 out of 10 for me. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing it next time. Bye for now.